This is one of the best projects that you can add to your resume because it not only shows that you're able to create solid JavaScript code that can be used in a library, but it also shows that you have a great attention to detail because creating a select drop-down box that's good is actually incredibly difficult because there's so many small things you need to pay attention to and make sure work properly. So in this video, I'm going to show you exactly how to build out a really basic select drop-down box, which is going to be perfect for you to improve upon and add to your resume. How would you like to have a free AI-powered code review tool that tells you exactly what's wrong with your code, how to refactor it, and how to write it better? I mean, this sounds amazing, and luckily for you, today's video sponsor, Embold, is going to give you just that. This tool not only gives you your generic linter output, but also takes it a step further and uses their AI to give you powerful insight into how to refactor your code to make it cleaner, what different metrics your code is following or not following, and just general advice on how to write your code in a better way that's going to give you a more maintainable and more bug-free code. If that sounds interesting, make sure you check out the link down in the description to get started on their incredibly generous free tier, and also stick around till the end of this video where I show you how to use Embold on this exact project. Welcome back to Web Dev Simplified. My name's Kyle, and my job is to simplify the web for you so you can start building your dream project sooner. So if that sounds interesting, make sure you subscribe to the channel for more videos just like this. So to get started, I actually have some starting HTML. It's just a boilerplate HTML page that has a select box that includes all 50 of the US states. I just didn't want you to have to watch me type this out by hand. It's pretty painful. And it has a label that says state. Really basic HTML. And you can just copy this, or you can download it from my GitHub, which I'll link in the description. Either way, doesn't matter. And over here on the right, we have the version that is showing on the left. So this is just the basic select HTML. There's no JavaScript, no styles, no nothing. Then over here on the left, we have essentially the custom dropdown box that we're going to be creating. It works very similar to the normal dropdown box, but ours is completely custom, so we can style it however we want. You can make it even cooler looking than this. We just made the basic styles in this example, and it works exactly the same. You can use arrow keys, you can use enter, you can use escape to close it. All of the normal functionality of the select box is in this select box. So in order to get started building out this custom select box, all we need to do is create some JavaScript files and some CSS files. So I'm going to create a script.js file. This script.js file is just going to be the normal JavaScript file you would use on any website. And then we're going to create a separate file called select.js. And this select.js file is going to be the file that we put all of our select code inside of. Think about this as a library you would download from NPM. That's what this select.js file is going to be. You could even go so far as to create a library with this select.js class or file, sorry. And then also I'm going to create a simple style sheet called select.css. This is going to be all the styles associated with our select dropdown. So that's why we're calling it select.css. This script file is just generic. It could be for any website. And this select is specifically for our select box. Those are all the files that we're going to need for this project. And to get started, the very first thing I want to do is just kind of brainstorm what our select is going to look like. Because what I want to do inside my script tag, I want to essentially import a select from that select right here. And then all I want to do is create a new select. So I could say like new select, and then I could pass it in whatever, the element that I want. So this would be like the select element. This is essentially what I want to do. And then over here, I now have my new custom select, and I could do things like if I wanted to say select.setValue and pass it in a value of like Nebraska, for example, I could do that. So I want to be able to create a custom select, but just by instantiating it like this. That's probably going to be the most basic way I want to use this. So in order to do that, we're going to create a class inside of select.js, and we're going to make sure we export that as the default. So we're going to export this select class, make sure I call this a class. And inside of here, we're going to have a constructor, and this constructor is going to take our select element. And this is essentially the element that's on our page. So if we go here, that would be this select element right here. It can be any select element though. We can just say this dot select element equals select element. And since we already know that this is a select, since our class here is called select, we can even just shorten this down to just say element. I think that'll make it a little bit easier to work with the code overall. So now just to see if this works, let's just close out of this working example so that we have here our current working code. This is the code we're currently working on. As you can see, there's nothing custom about it. Let's just save all these files real quick, get rid of this. So we're just creating a new select, and let's just get our selects. And in order to select what selects we want to be custom, that's a lot of select, let's just use the data attribute called data custom. Then inside of our script, data custom, not customs, there we go. And then inside of here, we can just say const select elements is equal to document.querySelector all of data, data custom. Now in our example, there's only one custom select, but you can assume on a real web page, you're going to have multiple select elements. So we can just take each one of these, we can loop over it, and inside of here, we have our select element, element. There we go. And with our select element, we just want to create a new select for that select element. And we can even set it to a variable if we really want. But in our case, we don't even need to set it to a variable because we're not going to do anything with it inside of this script.js. This is kind of just a placeholder of where you would put your code for your specific website after you create the select. So now we've created a select, but right now it hasn't done anything. We haven't added it to our page. We haven't created any custom code for. All we do is have this select. And if I just do a console log here real quick to see if this is even working, and make sure up here that we include our script tags. So we can say script, which has a source here that is going to be script.js. We can defer that. And also, we're just going to say that the type here is module, which means we don't even need to include defer. It defers automatically. And then, since we have inside of our script our import, that should all work. So now if I just inspect our page, bring this over, go to our console, we of course see an error. The server responded with a status 404. That's just because this should be select.js. And now you can see we have a select, and right now it has one property, which is the element, and that element is our select element. As you can see, I hover it and it shows up over here. So we essentially created a custom class and we linked it to our current select element. Now the next step is going to be essentially rendering our own custom select because it's really hard to modify the select element and make it custom looking, the one that's built into the browser. So we want to just completely hide that, remove it, and replace it with our own select element. Now, in order to do this, we kind of need to think of the different components of a select box. The select box essentially has the box that we can click on, and it has the content inside of that box, which is all of the different options. That's really the main things that we need to think about when it comes to this custom element. So inside of our select.js, let's create some references to elements that are going to be those things on our page. So the very first thing that we want to do is we want to get the wrapper that goes around our entire custom element. We'll just call this custom element, and we'll say create an element, and this is going to be a div. So essentially this is a div that's going to contain all of our custom element code. Then what we want to do is create a custom label element. This is going to be this section here where we click, that's going to have the text for the currently selected element. In our example, as you can see here, Arizona. So we're going to set our label element here equal to a new create element. We want this to be a span because by default, select boxes are inline like this. So we want to follow that inline-ish behavior by using a span. Then lastly, we're going to have an options custom element. And all this is the thing that contains our different options. It's this big list right here. So we're going to create an element, and this one's going to be a UL because we're creating a list of elements. Now the final step is to actually do all of the code to make these look like we want them to, but I don't want to do that in the constructor because that's going to be a little bit messy. So I could create like a setup function here that goes through and sets up everything inside of here. But I don't really like exposing a setup function on our class because now in our script here, we can access that setup method. We could say .setup here, for example. And I don't really want this method to be publicly available to other people to use. And for now, we can just get rid of this console log. We don't really need it anymore. So I don't want that to be publicly available. And so instead, I'm going to put this outside of our class. It's going to be a function called setup custom element. And all this is going to do is take our custom select. And instead of calling it custom select, let's just call this select here. So it's going to take our class. So up here, we could just say setup custom element and pass it this. And this is our entire class here. We're just passing it the class that contains our custom element, our label element, as well as our options custom element and the actual select itself. Now that we have that done, I essentially just want to add a bunch of classes to these elements. Then we're going to style them. And then we're going to come back here and actually do extra code for making the functionality work. So first thing I want to do is I want to take our select. I want to get our custom element, which is this thing we created right up here. I want to get the class list on it, and I want to add a class called custom select container. And essentially all of the styles that we're using, I'm going to append this custom select to the beginning of them. That way our styles that we create don't accidentally interfere with the styles of the actual website itself. Because if we were to just call this, for example, container, there may be a class called container already in styles for someone else's website, and we don't want our styles to override their styles. So by adding something in the beginning, we're just making it harder for those styles to conflict. We could even make it more difficult by adding like 2 underscores at the beginning or something really weird and funky to make sure there's no conflicts. But for now, this is good enough for our use case. Next thing I want to do is get the label element, and that's again this element up here. And I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm just going to add a class to it, so we can just copy this down. And this one is going to be called here the value. And that's just because it's the selected value that we're showing up here. That's just the class we're going to be giving it. I want to make sure I add this to our custom element. So we're going to just append our label to our custom element. That way it's inside of that container that we've created. Next thing that I want to do, go into our select. I want to get here our options custom element. Same thing, grab the class list, and I want to add a value to it. This is just custom select options. Let's just make this a little bit wider. There we go. And then I can take our custom element and I can append those options inside of it. So select.options, options custom element, and that's going to be appended inside of our container. So now we have our label and our list of options both appended inside of this custom element. Now the last thing I want to do is actually take it so that this custom element shows up on our page. And I'm going to do that up in the constructor. A really easy way to do that is we can take our element, and what we can do is say dot after, and we can pass it our custom element. This is just going to append this element after the current element that we selected. So it's going to take our select, and afterwards it's going to put our custom element. And if we save, you're going to notice nothing actually happens, and that's because our divs are empty. Everything on our page is empty. If we go into the body here, we should see nothing's actually working, but it looks like we have an error. It says cannot read property add of undefined, and that's on line 13 inside of here. So it's where this class list is. I must have spelled class list wrong. There it is. It looks like I accidentally used some lowercase l's in here. So now if I save, you can see that error went away. And now if I go back to the elements of our page, right after our select, you can see we have our custom select, which contains our custom select value and our list of custom select options. That's pretty much all that we need to get started with rendering out the styles for our stuff. But you'll notice there's no options inside of our list. I want to add some options to our list. So in order to do that, we need to get the options from our element up here. This is luckily very straightforward to do. We can just say this dot options is going to be equal to our element dot query selector all, and I want to get all the option elements inside of our select. This is just going to give us all the options. If I inspect this here, you can see in our select we have all these options. It's just going to return to us all these options. And I want to take these options and convert them to an actual JavaScript object so we can use it in our code. So I'm going to create a function called get formatted options. I'm going to pass it that list of options. And again, I'm going to do this outside of our class because I don't want this to be exposed to the end user. Then inside of here, we have all of our options elements. I'm just going to call this option elements. There we go. And in here, I just want to loop through those option elements. And these option elements I actually need to convert to an array first in order to use the map function, because this is not available when we just do query selector all. We don't have this map function we can use. So if I convert it to an array first, then I can actually use this map function. And if you're interested by this triple dot syntax, I have an entire video covering it. I'll link up in the cards for you. So for each one of our option elements, what we want to do is we just want to return them as an object. So our value is going to be our option element dot value. We want to get our label, which is our option element dot label. We want to determine here if it is selected. Whoops, make sure I spell that correctly. And this is just option element dot selected. And then finally, we want to get the element itself in case we need to reference it for other things. So we'll just say the option element here. By doing this, it's just going to make it slightly easier to work with our element as a whole, since we have everything exposed on this object. So that gives us our formatted options, and those are going to be in this options object. Then with our options custom element, that's just our list of options, we can append all of our new options to that element. So all I want to do is right inside of here, I want to take our select.options and I want to loop through each one of our options. So for each option, what I want to do is create a brand new element. I'm going to create an option element. And in our case, this is just going to be an li. So we can say document.createElement li. This li is going to go inside of this unordered list that we've created already for these options custom elements. So for that option element, what I want to do, option element, I want to add a class to it. So we can say class list dot add. We're going to have custom select option. And then if this is selected, I also want to add a select class. So class list dot toggle the selected class, and I only want that to be true if the element is selected. Now we're going to give it a selected class if our option is selected. This is so we can highlight it in blue, very similar to how this highlights in blue. Now lastly, just so we can actually see this working, let me add a little bit of text to our option element. So say option element dot inner text, is going to be equal to option.label. And we'll just get the value on here too. So we'll say option value is in the dataset.value, which is our option value. This is just so we have access to both our value and our label whenever we need them. Also, while we're on the trend of putting text inside of things, up here, we can take our select.label element, and we can take our inner text, and what I want to do is set that equal to our selected option.value. But right now we don't have a selected option. So way up here in our code, I actually want to create a getter that's going to return our selected option. So we're going to call it selected option. And all this is going to do is just return to us the selected option. So to do that, we can just take all of our options, and I want to find the option that is selected. So option.selected. There we go. This is going to return to us the selected option. Now down here, we should have that value. And if I save, hopefully, there's probably an error because nothing's showing up. So let's just check. Cannot read property find of undefined. So that's saying this.options cannot read find because there is no options. So that means most likely get formatted options up here is not returning anything. And of course, I forgot to include our return statement right there. So now you can see AL is the value. We don't actually want the value here. We want the label. As you can see, Alabama is the label being printed out. So if we inspect this now, we have our span, which has the value of Alabama, and our UL still doesn't have items in it. So down here, let's just make sure we take our options custom element, and then we just want to append our option element. This gives us a nice list of elements on the side, and now we can actually work on styling them all. The very first thing I want to do is set up box sizing to be border box. And normally you would just do that by using an everything selector and then saying box sizing of border box. But I don't want to do that because this is a library that's being used. So if someone imports this library, it's going to convert all of their code to use this box sizing border box. So I want this to only be for our selectors. So we have our custom select container. And then I'm just going to copy this down a couple times, remove all these extra brackets. There we go. We don't need that many. And we also have a custom select here, which is our value. Make sure we get rid of that bracket too. We have our options, and then we have each one of our individual option. These are essentially all of our classes, and I've converted them all to use a border box. Now the next step is going to be working on actually styling this whole thing out. So the first thing I want to do is style out this value section right here. So I can say custom select value, and I'm just going to change the display here to flex. That's just going to allow me to center everything a lot easier. I want to align the items in the center, and I want to justify content space between. And that may seem a little weird that we're doing all of this alignment, but that's because I want to add a little caret symbol. That's what this downward facing symbol is. That when we click on it, we can kind of see that this is a select box. So in order to add that caret symbol in, all I need to do is come down and create a custom select value after pseudo element and set the content here to be an empty string so it shows up. And if you're confused by pseudo elements in CSS, I have an entire tutorial on them. I'll link up in the cards for you. So in here, let's just say our display is going to be inline block. That way it shows up inline, but we can also modify the sizing of it. And in order to make a triangle shape, we're going to be using a border. So I can just say border of 4 pixels solid, and I want it to be transparent. And then to actually create a triangle, if we just change one of the border colors to be solid, this is going to give us a triangle. So now to see how this all works, let's add this to our page. We'll go to our index here. We'll say link CSS called select.css. And as you can see way over here, we have a triangle showing up, and that's that border top section working for us. You'll also notice it kind of fills the entire page, which is way bigger than we want it to be. So here, I'm going to set a maximum width of 200 pixels. That's just going to shrink this down a little bit. Also, I want to add a nice border. We'll do a border of 1 pixel solid black and a little bit of padding, because if we save that, it's going to be really crunched up on the sides. So we're going to say padding here, 0.25 rem and 0.5 rem. It's just going to give us a little bit of spacing around our element, kind of a nice big select box, which I like. Next, I want to change our cursor to be pointer, so that way we can actually click on it. If I come over here, you can see I can click on it now. It has that little clicker. And I want to make sure I can't highlight this text. To do that, you use user select and set that to none. Essentially, that means that you cannot highlight any text. As you can see, I'm trying to highlight this, but it won't let me. And that's what we want. We don't want to highlight this. It just doesn't make sense. You can't do that in normal select, so you can't do that in R select either. Now, one thing you'll notice is this shows up on another line when we really want it to show up in line. I'm going to take our wrapper, which is called custom select container. I'm also going to change this to be a display of inline block And then also I'm going to create a position relative on this because later we're going to be making it so that this list of items is positioned absolutely inside of its container. So we need this to be relative. And if we save, you can see that it still doesn't show up on one line. But if I increase the width of my screen, you can see that now it's showing up on one line. And as you can see, if we scroll way down here, we have the other section. So it's all on one line. It just doesn't quite look like it because that stuff is so far below. Now the next step is going to be styling these different options. If we just come down here, we can say custom select, select options. And what I want to do is just change the display to none immediately. They should be hidden by default. And I also, like I mentioned earlier, want to position these absolutely. By doing this position of absolute, I essentially make it so that none of the other sections of the page will scroll when we actually show the custom select, which is good because we don't want the rest of the page to react when we choose this. Now the next thing I want to do is by default, a list has some padding and margin around it. So I'm just going to remove all the padding and margin. So we'll say padding and margin set to 0. And for now, just so we can see what our list looks like, I'm going to comment out the display of none so we can actually see our list and see what's happening to it. As you can see, it's been squished up way close to everything because we've removed that padding and margin. Next, I want to create a border around this. We'll do a 2-pixel solid black border. And you may think that's a little weird that the border around this container is actually wider than the border around our select container. But you'll notice when we select our default select here, that it's going to have a darker border around it like that. I want to do the exact same thing to our select. So we're actually going to double the size of the border whenever we click on it and focus it, which means it'll be the same 2 pixels as this select box here. Next, I want to increase the width of this to 100%. That way it's the same width as our select dropdown up here. I also want to remove the border on the top, just because it doesn't make sense to have that extra border at the top because there's already a border on our select dropdown box, so it would be a double border, which we don't need. Next, I want to set the max height here to 200 pixels, just so it doesn't overflow our screen like it is right now. And our overflow behavior will just be to scroll. So on the Y direction, we're just going to set it to auto, which means it'll scroll when it gets too large. So now as you can see, we have this list we can scroll through and it's not going to go off the edge of our page because the maximum height is 200 pixels. Now the next thing I want to do is put this display block back or display none back in here. And then for our custom select options, when we want to show them, which we'll just denote by a class of show, then we're going to come in here and change the display to block just so they show up just like that. So now we can actually show these elements with the class of show. Now, so that we can finally style the rest of our page, I'm just going to uncomment this again so we can style our actual select elements. So come down here, custom select option, and of course I spelled select wrong again. And in here, I just want to add a bunch of padding. So we'll say 0.25 rem, 0.5 rem, and the cursor is going to be pointer so that we can actually click on them. As you can see, that spaced them out quite a bit, which looks good. Next, we'll put in some hover styles. So we'll say custom select option for selected. This is going to be for our selected element. And then we're going to do the exact same thing. I'm going to copy that down. But instead of selected, this is going to be for our hover. And when we are hovering, we just want a really light color. So we're going to say our background color is just HSL 200, 100%, and 50%. That's going to give us this nice light blue color. As you can see, we kind of get this nice bluish color. And then for selected, I want to do a very similar thing. We'll say background color HSL 200, 100%, and 70% here. So it's just going to be a little bit of a lighter color for the one that's currently selected, as you can see. And I'm going to be honest, I'm not a huge fan of this. I'm actually going to flop these values. So this one's 50%, and this one is 70. So the one that's currently selected is that nice darker color, and the one we're hovering is this lighter blue color. And then to make it so we don't have the hover effect show up on the one that's selected, I'm just going to reverse the order of these two selectors. So now the one that's selected never has that hover effect. And I think that looks pretty good. That's very similar to the drop-down box that we have up here. And it's nice that this one highlights the one that's currently selected as we go to select something else. But clearly, none of the actual functionality of this works. So in order to finish this out, let's just take this, remove this style, or actually add it back in so it's no longer showing unless we actually want it to be shown. And then the final thing I want to do is make it so we have a focus style on this. So when we focus on it, we can actually make it have that wider border. So we can just come down here, custom select value. We want to do focus. And inside of here, I want the border width to be 2 pixels. And I want the outline to be none, because we're actually doing our own outline. And this by default is not going to work because we can't actually focus this element. And instead of focusing on this span that contains the text, I want to focus on this container instead. So I'm going to focus the container, then inside of here, I want to select the custom select value. And this is not going to work because right now our container does not allow us to focus. It's just a div, and divs don't have a focus. If I hit tab, you can see I've selected this select, but if I hit tab again, it doesn't select this element. So in order to fix that, all we need to do is take our custom element here, and we just want to, custom element. We want to find the tab index, and we're just going to set it to 0. By using a tab index of 0, what that does is says, hey, JavaScript, this is something that we can focus. So when we use the tab key, we'll be able to tab from here down to here. As you can see, we now have the focus ability on here, and we can also click it to focus it. So we have 100% control over focusing on this element. And by using 0 here as the tab index, all we're really saying is to make sure this is in the proper tab order. So it's the next thing after our current select, which is why it's the next thing that gets tabbed onto. Also, you can see that this caret symbol is just a little bit off in my opinion. So I'm going to go over here and actually modify it slightly. We're just going to add a few little margin to it. So we'll say the margin on the left should be 12 pixels. And we're going to do some margin on the top, which is 4 pixels. It just makes it a little bit more centered. And this margin on the left just means it won't touch our text here, because if we had a really long text, for example, like District of Columbia, which is pretty long, we don't want our text to touch our little arrow symbol. Now that pretty much constitutes all of our CSS. The only other thing that we need to do is up here, I want to take our current element, I want to just make it hidden. So we're going to say style display equals none. So now our old select has been replaced with the completely custom select. We have the ability to select it, but right now when we select it, nothing actually happens. So the first thing I want to do is just add the most basic functionality of when you click on this to show all the items in the dropdown. So down here, we have our custom element. So when we click on this custom element, I want to show the dropdown. So we'll come all the way down here a little ways, just give us some space. We'll say select.custom element dot add event listener. And this event listener is going to be for a click. And whenever we click on it, all I want to do is show these options. So we're going to copy this option container. We're going to add a class list to it. So we'll say class list.add, and we want to add show. And actually, we want to toggle the show class, because if it's already shown and we click on it, we want to hide it. So now if I click, it shows our list of items. If I click again, it hides them. And that looks really good. Now, the next thing I want to do is make it so that we can actually select an item. Because if I click on Arkansas, for example, it doesn't actually select the element. It closes out our dropdown list like we want, but it doesn't actually select Arkansas or California in our case. So I want to make it so our option elements do something when we click on them. So we can say here, option element, we want to add an event listener for click. And inside of this click event listener, all I want to do is select that value. So we can say select.select value. We pass it our option.value. And this is just a function that we're going to create. Next thing I want to do is make sure we hide our options custom select. So we'll say options custom element.classlist.remove show. And this is just to make sure that it hides it, because when we click on it, we don't want this to be shown at all. So now let's create that select value function up here. We can say select value, which takes in a value, and we want it to do some code. Whoops, make sure I spell value right. Now all I want to do with this is I just want to take our selected value. I want to get the new selected value. So we can say new selected option is going to be equal to this dot options. And I want to find the one option here that has this value. So we can say option dot value equals value. So when this is true, this is going to be our new selected option. And our previous selected option is just our currently selected option, but it's the one that's going to no longer be selected anymore because we're replacing it with this new one. So we have our new selected option and our previous selected option based on what the value is that we clicked on. So with our previous selected option, I want to take that selected flag, set it to false, and I also want to make sure that I take our element and set the selected here to false as well. That way it's no longer selected on our default select element. This is just making sure that our object is no longer selected and the element is no longer selected. Then with our new selected option, I want to do the opposite. I want to set the selected to true. Here, I want to do the exact same thing for the element selected, and I want to set that to true as well. So this is just doing the opposite of what we did here for our previous option. Now that takes care of the selection process for us. The next thing I need to do is actually make it so that our text shows up properly here, and so that our element shows up properly highlighted with that selected class. So the first thing that I want to do here is just take our label element. I want to take the inner text on it, and I want to set it to our new selected option .label. Let's just see if this works. If I select Arizona, you can see my text up here has changed to Arizona. If I check Colorado, it changes up here to Colorado. For some reason, this isn't closing. I wonder if we have an error. We do not. Let's just check our code real quick. Selected option, we remove the class list show, but then down here, we're toggling it again. The reason this error is occurring is because this is on our custom element, and our custom element contains this dropdown. We want this to just be our label element. Only if we click up here do we want to actually close our dropdown. So now if we click Connecticut, it properly closes. If we click here, we can toggle it. Now the last thing that we need to do is actually make it so that our selected class gets moved to the correct option. And we can actually do that inside of here. I think that'll be a little bit easier. All we need to do is just say option element dot class list dot add selected. And then we need to get what our current option is, which we can do way up here before we select our value. So we can say our current option, which is our select.selected option.element, and we can take the class list and we can remove selected. So this is going to remove selected from our currently selected option, select the new option, and then it's going to add selected to it. So let's see if that works. We click on California. You can see that now it has given that the collect class, but up here, we have not removed our class properly. Now, the reason that this isn't actually working is because this is giving us the selected option element, but we want to get our custom element because that's the one that we need to put our class list on. So in order to get the custom element, what we can do is we can just say our select.options custom element, and we want to do a quick query selector. I only want to get one. I want to get it where the data value is equal to a certain value. I'm just going to use string interpolation here. It'll be a little bit easier. And this value is going to come from our selected option dot value. So we can say dot value here. Make sure we wrap this in quotes, close off those brackets, and essentially we're selecting our option that has this specific value, which is our currently selected option value. Then we can remove the class list from it. So I can say class list dot remove selected, just like this. Now, hopefully, if I select Colorado, you can see it removed the selected from Alabama. If I choose Arizona, now Colorado is no longer selected. Now that's majority of what we need to do when it comes to the mouse, but you'll notice if we click to open this and then click off of it, it doesn't actually close our list. This is actually really easy to fix. We just need to take our select custom element, we need to add an event listener here, and this event listener is on blur. Essentially, when you have a blur event, it means you lost focus. And you only focus an element when you've clicked onto it or tabbed onto it, and if you click off or tab off of it, you're going to lose focus. So inside of here, we can just essentially copy this line of code, but instead of toggling the class, we just want to remove it. So now, if I click to open this and click anywhere else on the screen, it closes it. Or if I tab to go somewhere else, it's going to close it. But it's no longer just going to stay open, and that's exactly what we want. Now this right here is where most people stop when it comes to creating a custom select element, and theirs is not going to be nearly as good as ours because select elements have the ability to be controlled with the keyboard. When we tab onto this, a normal select you can open by clicking the spacebar. You can also navigate by using the arrow keys. We can't do any of that right now. There's no keyboard interaction. Escape would normally close the select box, but we don't have that functionality. We want to build all of that functionality in. So I want to add yet another event listener on our custom element. And this add event listener here is going to be for when we press a key, so key down. And in here, all we want to do is do a simple switch statement on the e.code. This will determine what key we're pressing. So in the case of the space key, all I want to do is open up and show our select. So we can take our select.options, custom element, class list, and we want to toggle the show class. This is going to either hide or show this for us because when we click space, that's what we want to do. And then we'll just throw in a break here. So if we save this and we hover this by focusing it and click space, you can see we can open this up. Space to close it. So we can open and close this now with the space bar instead of having to use the key or the mouse, we can now just use the keyboard. The next key that I want to focus on here is going to be, case. This is going to be for the arrow up key. And then we're also going to do a very similar thing for the arrow down key as well. Make sure we throw a break into both of these just like that. And for our arrow up, I want to get our previous option. And this previous option is going to come from our select.options. And I want to just get the index of our selected option. So we say selected option index -1. So in order to get this selected option index, we'll create another property up here for it. Get selected option index. And this index is very simply just going to be the index of our selected option. So we can say this, make sure we return it, this dot options dot index of this dot selected option. So the index of our selected option is going to be our selected option index. Then way down here, we're just subtracting 1 from it to get our previous option. And if we have a previous option, then I want to select that previous option. So we can say select value our previous option. So let's see if this works. Let's just select Colorado. And now if I click the up arrow, nothing is actually working. So clearly something is wrong in our code. And let's see if we have any errors. In our console, we have an error cannot set property selected of undefined, which means our previous option is most likely undefined. Obviously, it can't be undefined or it wouldn't enter this if, but we're passing an option instead of a value in here. So let's make sure we pass a value. Now let's select Connecticut, hit the up arrow. You can see we changed Colorado up here, California, Arkansas, but our actual select is not being moved. That's because we have our select code inside of here. That's probably not the best place to put it. We should probably put it way up here where we select a value. So I'm going to kind of move this code and redefine it just slightly. So we're going to take this code and move it up into here. We're going to have to obviously change how it's working, and then this code as well. So in here, all we're doing is just selecting our element and removing it. And then inside of here, we're actually doing all of the code for correctly adding our classes. Now what we can do is we can get the data value for our previous selected option and our new selected option. So we'll say prev selected option dot value, and we can get that from this dot options custom element, query selector on it, and remove selected. And if I just copy this, do the exact same thing for our new selected option, we can add in that selected class. All we're essentially doing here is just searching for the element that has the value from our previous selected option and the one that has the value from our new selected option, and we're just adding or removing that selected class. So now, if I click, this should still work, but if I use the arrow key, you can also see that my selection is moving as I use the up arrow key. Obviously, the down arrow key doesn't work yet because we haven't written that code, but up is working, which is great. Now let's just do the exact same thing for down. I'm just going to copy this code essentially exactly, change this to be called the next option. This is going to be a +1 instead of a -1, and then just make sure these are both next and next. So let's test this. Down arrow key, you can see that that's working. Up arrow key is working. And the best part is I can even move my selection without even opening up the dropdown, which is great. So I can do it with the dropdown open. I can do it with the dropdown closed. It doesn't matter. Now the next two keys that I want to worry about are the escape key and the enter key. In a select, they both do the same thing. They both close out this box. So if I hit escape or enter, it should close out my opened box. So for the case of enter, and for the case, which is going to be escape, I want to essentially just take my select. I want to take the options custom element. I want to take the class list, and I want to remove the class of show. And then make sure we put our break in here. There we go. So now if this is open, I hit escape, it closes. If I hit enter, it closes, or if I hit space, it'll close because space toggles it for us. Now the final major key-based thing that we need to focus on is if I start typing in, for example, C, I want to select the first thing that matches that C, or if I type in CO, I want it to go down to Colorado. I want to be able to move my selection based on what I type in. Right now, I can type all I want, it's not going to select anything. So since we can select really any key, I'm just going to put this as our default case because any key we click is going to be used for this searching functionality. And normally with a select box, what happens is you have a short period of time between each key press where you can click it and it'll add on to it. So if I go COL really close together, it'll give me Colorado because that matches that COL. But if I type in C, wait a little bit, then type in O, it's going to move me all the way down here to these O states, for example, Ohio or Oklahoma. So I want to be able to set in a little bit of a timeout that happens, that if there's too long of a delay, I clear out my previous search and start a new search. And the best way to do that is by something called debounce. So way up here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a variable here called debounce timeout. This is the timeout that I'm going to use for my debounce technique. And then we're going to have our search term. If you're not familiar with the term debounce, that's fine. I'm going to be explaining it as we type. Our search term by default is just an empty string. So inside of here, what I want to do is I want to clear my timeout, which is the debounce timeout. And this debounce timeout, if we just create it down here, is all it's going to do is just be a set timeout. And this timeout is going to be pretty short. And in it, I'm just going to clear out my search term by setting it to 0 here. And we're just going to say 500 milliseconds, so half a second. So if I type a key, it's going to start this debounce timer. So in 500 milliseconds, it's going to clear all of my search history. And just for here, we're going to say search term plus equals e.key. This is going to add our key onto this search term for our search capabilities. So if we wait too long, it's going to clear our search term out. But if we keep typing, it's going to keep clearing out our timeout and resetting it. So every single time we hit a key, we get another half a second to hit a new key to continue on with our search. This is very similar to how the normal select box searching works. And just to show you how this works, let me just console log the search term. And we're just going to come inspect the page here, go to the console. If I select this and I start typing CO, you can see our search term is CO. But I've waited a little while, so now if I start typing LS, you can see that my new search is LS, because after 500 milliseconds, it clears my search term. So if I type a bunch of keys really fast, it's going to keep them going, but as soon as I wait too long, it's going to reset my search for me. This is great because it allows you to do really basic searching. So instead of just logging out the search, that's pretty useless, let's actually get the options. So we're going to say searched option is equal to our select.options.find. We just want to find the first option that starts with our search term. So we can say option.label.to lowercase, because we only want to use the lowercase version of this. And we want to see when it starts with our search term, just like that. And we're just going to make sure we return this to get our searched option. And if we have a searched option, then I just want to select it. So we can say select.select value, and I want to select our searched option.value. There we go. So let's see if this actually works. If I type in, for example, AR, it goes to Arizona. If I wait a little bit, type in CA, we now go to California. One thing interesting though, if I type in something like NE, you can see it selected Nebraska, but it didn't scroll us all the way down to where Nebraska is. Same thing if I use arrow keys, I'm off the page. I can't see where my arrow keys are, even though I'm all the way down here. So I want to be able to make sure I move to that location. This is luckily very easy to do. All the way up here, when we're selecting our element, let's see, right here is where we get our previous element. Here is where we get our new element. So I want to just set this to a variable. We can say const new custom element. There we go. And then we can say new custom element, and we can add our class list. We can also say new custom element dot scroll into view. And all we want to do is say here, block, a block is nearest. Essentially, all this is going to do is make sure it's always showing up on our screen at the closest variable option. So if we start hitting the down arrow key, you can see it's always moving it onto our screen. Start hitting up, you can see again, always in our screen. If we search NE, you can see it shows up at the bottom of our screen. It's always going to scroll us to the element and make sure it's 100% visible on our screen. And that right there is our custom select. But like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I'm going to show you how you can use a tool which is going to empower you to be able to do code reviews and look to make sure your code is following best practices. And actually, by using this tool on this project, it gave me the idea to add in this default case here and to actually do the searching. Because originally when I built this, I didn't have any search functionality built in, but this tool told me I should add a default case. And it made me think, what is the default case of a state, or of a select, I'm sorry, and it was this search capability. So it was really great for adding this search capability in, and I'm sure it's going to do great things for you. So in order to get started with this code checking, all you need to do is make sure you publish all of your code to a GitHub repository. I have mine right here. I just published it. And you need to go to inbold.io. I'll have it linked in the description down below. But essentially, once you get to this site, let me just make it a little bigger for you. You want to click on Create New Project, give your project a name. We'll say Custom Select Dropdown because that's what we created. Create the project, and then from here is where you're going to link up your GitHub repository. So we're going to say it's coming from Git. We need to copy in the URL. So let's just copy that URL like this. And we're going to give it a name of Custom Select Dropdown. And selecting the language, ours is written in JavaScript. So we'll say JavaScript and link repository. Give it a little bit of time to load, and you can see we can now scan our repository. And let's just click on scan. So this is going to scan through all of our code and figure out any issues with our code. Not only is it going to give us syntax problems, it also is going to give us nice linting errors, as well as errors related to if we have too many lines of code in a function, or if our code just is not very well clean or very maintained. It's going to give us all of this information. It's really, really powerful. I'm going to come back to you as soon as the scan finishes. Okay, so the scan just finished. If I click on this, it's going to allow me to open it up. Click on it again one more time. And you can see that we have an overall rating of 4.25. That's not too bad. The biggest issue is in this code issue section. As you can see, we have a 3.83. Our design is 5 out of 5, and our metrics is a 4.58. So let's click into our code issues to see what our issues are. We have 4 low issues, it says, in our select.js class. So if we click on this, you can see each of our issues right here. It says no case declarations is this one, and then we have some curly issue down here. And if we click on one of these, it'll bring us to the exact line where this issue is. So you can see that this line is occurring right here. And if I hover over this one, click on it, it'll say no case declaration, and it gives me an explanation, which is really useful because I don't know what no case declaration means just on its own. You can see that it says unexpected lexical declaration in case block. Essentially, this rule disallows lexical declarations, so let const functions or classes, in a case/default clause. And the reason is that these declarations are visible in the entire switch blocks, but it only gets initialized when it's assigned. So it's a fancy way of saying, essentially, when I create this const previous option, it's available anywhere inside of this switch, not just this one case. So to get around that, you would need to put curly braces here. So if we were to go into our code, let me just expand this out. What we would do is we would just put some curly braces to wrap these sections. So we'd wrap our arrow down section in curly braces and our arrow up section, which is where we use those const variables. And now this const is scoped only inside of these curly braces. It makes it so that we don't have weird bugs that occur if we have another const variable called previous option in a different case. It just stops those bugs from occurring. So that's a great warning for us to have. I'm glad that it told us about that. Now, if we scroll down a little further, you can see down here we get another error, and it's saying that we have another lexical declaration inside of our default clause. So again, we can just wrap this in curly braces, and now all of these const variables inside of here are no longer going to be scoped in the entire switch. They're going to be scoped just in these curly braces. Again, great thing. Then finally down here it says it expected curlies. So essentially it doesn't like one-line if statements. You could disable this if you want, or you could just come into your code and you could add the curly braces yourself, so that you now no longer have those one-line if statements. And that'll clear up all of those issues inside of here, and that's going to clear up all of our code issues entirely. So if you wanted, you could push your changes. So I could just say git add, git commit, let's just say cleaned up code, and then git push. That's going to push up our changes to our GitHub repository. Once those finish pushing, we can rescan our repository by clicking scan here, and let's just click scan to ensure that we want to scan this custom select dropdown. It's going to go through and scan. It shouldn't actually take too long. And once it finishes scanning, I'll be right back with you. Okay, it just finished scanning. We can click this update button. It's going to show us the latest data. And now you can see we have a 4.95 overall rating. And if I just go all the way back to my component tree, click on this custom select dropdown section, close out this component tree, you can see, make my screen a little bit wider, that we have 4.96 overall rating, our design is 5, code issues are 5, we have none of those, and our metrics are just slightly low. And if we click on it, you can kind of see why these are. So it says lack of cohesion methods, and if you click on this, it'll bring you to the documentation that tells you exactly what this is. So essentially it's saying that our code just doesn't cohere very well inside of where it's at. And if we click on where this is, you can see that it's going to open that up for us in this script.js file. So we click on that, and up here, just click on our script.js. It's going to open up the file, and you can see that it's saying that this code is just lacking cohesion. That's perfectly okay. This code is really just placeholder code. It's not super important. So for our use case, our code is pretty much as clean as it can get. So this is a great tool to determine if your code's clean, things that you can change. And by adding in these different code issues and metrics and design issues, it really got you to think about certain things, such as the global const variables, or in my case, it told me to add a default here, which is how I remembered to add in all of this functionality, which is crucial to creating a good select dropdown box. So again, if you want to check this out, it's linked down in the description below. It's a pretty cool tool. I highly recommend it.